That's a tough act to follow.
It is.
What can I say?
We may not have 8-octave range, but we will solve climate change.
We'll try.
Yeah. Yeah, former writer.
So first of all, it's so great to be back at DLD in person. This is so exciting, and we have a really great panel for you today. The topic is interesting, too. We all know there's been a tremendous amount of talk about climate change in the conference already. But it's really clear, if you think about it, that you have to incentivize people and companies to do things towards climate change. It's not enough to make them feel guilty. There almost always has to be some lever, some sort of either financial lever or societal lever that really makes things move in the right direction. And I think that insurance is a very, very interesting topic that could potentially help. And so we gathered together this great panel. We have, let's see, from the very end, we have Jon Shieber. He's the chief editor and partner at the Footprint Coalition, which is an effort that was founded by Robert Downey Jr., the actor. We have Stephen Weinstein, who chairs the Bermuda Business Development Agency. He's also on the board of BIOS, which is the Bermuda Institute of Ocean Sciences. And Vishaal Bhuyan, who's the founder and CEO of Aanika Biosciences, a company that leverages the combination of synthetic biology and insurance to address the impact of climate change. So we're going to start with everybody just giving an introduction about themselves and their companies. Jon, do you want to go first?
Yeah, I'll try and make it brief. So Footprint Coalition was, in fact, founded by Robert Downey Jr. Back in 2019. We are a media, an investment, and a nonprofit organization. We make grants to early-stage scientific research focused on climate solutions. We also invest in those climate solutions when they become investable in our technologies. We have an early and late-stage fund that are open to any SEC-named qualified investor. So anyone who is a qualified investor can invest in our funds alongside us in some of these companies that are working on climate mitigation, climate adaptation, and planetary restoration. And we have a portfolio of 16 companies right now. They range from a nuclear fusion company to an alternative protein company. That's several alternative protein companies that are working on developing meats and cheeses that are more environmentally friendly and come from plants. Or are genetically engineered from cell cultures of animals. The media side, which I'm involved with sort of all of them, but the media side is focused on storytelling around and advocating for climate solutions. So all of these technologies that are coming to market, we're trying to create a single hub where people can find the information about these companies, and we can really engage with our audience and then Robert's audience of 100 million people who follow him across social media to tell these positive stories about what's coming in the future and how it's going to impact the world for the better. Robert, we also make shows because we have a Hollywood guy. So we are going to be launching our first show in November or December on Discovery Plus. It's a car show, kind of like a sustainable Pimp My Ride, where all of Downey's classic cars are getting turned into EVs or biofuel-powered cars, and trying to get as broad an audience as possible thinking about these solutions. How was that?
That's awesome. I love the tripartite structure of it. What were you going to say, Vishaal?
No, so that's right.
Oh. I want to see like a really classic car burning French fry oil or something.
I mean, it's coming. We're like, actually, well, I don't want to get too deep in the weeds, but we're either going to make a really cool Corvette, or in some people's versions, a monstrosity of a Corvette by like electrifying it. So, but it's like a beautiful vintage car. It's amazing. Anyway, y'all should watch. It'll be on Discovery.
So Stephen, I believe you have some slides.
I do. Hi, everyone. Steve Weinstein. It's a thrill to be with you. This is my first DLD, hopefully not my last, but I never want to go on after global rock stars again. Want to watch them. So I do currently chair the BIOS, the Bermuda Institute for Ocean Science, and the Bermuda Business Development Agency, which is the hat I'm mostly wearing today. Before that, I spent 2 decades in insurance and reinsurance. You're all familiar with insurance. We all deal with insurance. But I do tend to introduce reinsurance as the most interesting business that nearly no one has heard of. At its most simple form, it's insurance for insurance companies. Reinsurers talk about managing risk and capital, bringing them together in the forms that best suit. It's frequently in this product called reinsurance. So that's a B2B product, and reinsurers don't have any of the skills that Jon just described. What they are good at is understanding risk, measuring it, and trying to mitigate it. One of those most important risks is climate risk. Insurers give you great diversification. If the water boiler in your basement breaks and floods your basement, if you start a kitchen fire, with a few thousand policies in Munich or a few thousand policies in San Francisco, diversification. But you're concentrating risks for hurricanes or North European windstorms or wildfires. Reinsurers can take that risk and spread it in the world, reduce the cost of capital. And what are they seeing, though, with those types of catastrophic exposures is that curve. Right? So are we the last line of the defense or the pointing of the spear? We can debate that. But people who have been betting their money, paying these claims, collecting the data, see something that's indistinguishable from changes driven by climate change. As a tangent, most of my colleagues in the industry think it's anthropogenic, but that's not really their main source of concern. What they've been studying is what's happening, how fast is it, and what are we going to have to pay for in the future.
Can you put a dollar sign on like that spike? Like how much did reinsurance companies or insurance companies spend on climate-related disasters last year? Wasn't it? It's like a mind-boggling number.
It's 9 figures of billions.
So like you're talking almost like hundreds of billions of dollars.
Yeah, hundreds of billions annually, but that's what was modeled in the past, right? So this is not a stable hazard. This is an increasing hazard. The main driver of that change is climate. Now there's another driver, which is human beings are moving to where there's more risk, at times because they're subsidized to move there. Think Florida. We all like to live, many of us like to live on beaches or in rivers or in places like Northern California where it's gorgeous, but we're sending people signals to live where it's dangerous, not where it's safe. And if there are more than one insurance nerd in the room, for insurers and reinsurers, there's another problem here, which is the problem of correlation. As I mentioned, we are providing the great benefit of diversification. We presumed for centuries, literally, this is an old business, that windstorms in Asia were not correlated with wildfires in California. But increasingly it looks like they are because this driver of more heat in the system is producing correlation. To over-summarize, correlation is really, really bad. It's particularly bad out on the tail for these, which is the jargon for these remote events. It's very expensive, prohibitively for the capital. So reinsurers have been paying for this, and reinsurers and insurers, so they've been studying it, measuring it, deploying resources, investing in mitigation, both the science of mitigation at specific structures and increasingly in community mitigation. But because there's tons of billions of dollars, tens or hundreds of billion dollars exposed, there's a concomitant investment, but we're remote from the underlying risk, which is something that perhaps we'll talk about. There's also an opportunity, because relevance is a business opportunity, and insurers and reinsurers around the world are working together to close the climate protection gap. Innovating with new products, engaging, here we are. It's a B2B space, but we're out on the road, meeting new friends, talking to people, finding ways that we can work together, and telling our story. And again, partnering with other private sector players, with the governments, to try to bring more solutions to the natural disaster and climate risk space. Lots of insurance, regulatory interest in the insurance space. One element of this is pressure from investors and regulators to provide more transparency at validated climate risk measurements, and there might be some interesting ways to do that a little better going forward. And finally, I'd be remiss, I would have my passport revoked if I didn't mention that Bermuda wants to play a role on the stage as we have. It's the global capital of this type of reinsurance, and we want to be in partnership with global capitals like Munich and London and Singapore, a capital for climate risk finance. For 3 decades, Bermuda has been the best place in the world, bar none, to capitalize, domicile, and operate global B2B tech-levered financial services companies. That's a way to describe reinsurance, but it's also a way to describe some of the things I've heard about here. We know that when we move outside of the reinsurance ecosystem, people aren't aware of the benefits of the Bermuda platform. But with 4 centuries of conservation and environmental legacy, we were ESG before there was ASG, with this infrastructure that's been built up to support the most adjacent vertical, climate-driven reinsurance, we want to work with you to accelerate solutions to market. And again, I can't sing. I have 1/8 of an octave, but I'm really thrilled to be with you today, and I look forward to the conversation.
Yeah.
Thank you.
So now when we think of Bermuda, we also have to think of reinsurance. Everybody got it? Okay.
Right.
And Vishaal, tell us a little bit. This is one of the solutions that is potentially possible. Can we have his slides up? There we go.
There we go.
So tell me a little about Aanika. What does Aanika do?
So at Aanika, we are using microorganisms. So we've developed an organism that we can apply to products, food products or otherwise, to trace them through the supply chain. And the reason that's really important is because it's how we can ensure companies are making the right decisions in terms of the ingredients that they use and the products they use in a very kind of real way. It's sort of a new form of data. And so by applying our physical tags onto these products, which are microscopic, by the way, we can then test them later on in the supply chain to ensure ESG practices, to reduce risk in terms of food recalls. And so all of that those mitigation efforts play really well to the companies that are ensuring and protecting those supply chains. So it's really bookending these important supply chains with our technology to sort of drive change and drive kind of the right practices.
So you could apply this tag at the point of origin, for example?
Correct. So how do we ensure that companies are using sustainable palm oil, for example? So we can apply our tag almost as an ingredient in the product and then verify that it is actually what we all want it to be and use the practices that we are pushing.
Why would someone want to switch it out? Is it cheaper to not use sustainable
You've got problems
practice?
like, adulteration is a massive problem. I think consumers spend roughly 5 cents for every dollar at the supermarket, and that all goes to things like adulteration and food fraud. There are a number of different reasons, but our technology can really help address those challenges.
Cool. So I guess let's take a few questions and throw them out at the panel. I'll start with you, Jon. How do we incentivize earth-friendly practices?
Well, that's a big question, but I think insurers are definitely one lever that can be pulled, right? Mm-hmm. I think when people think about climate change and mitigation, the onus of responsibility tends to be on the individual. It's your carbon footprint. It's your eating meat. It's your driving an internal combustion engine, you flying a plane. But the problem is not you. It's that these systems haven't evolved to account for sustainability and climate change. You, as a consumer, don't have a ton of choice yet, and those choices are very, very expensive, right? So what insurance companies can do, what banks can do, what other financial services players can do is drive down the costs or encourage adoption and make these things possible, right? So when you think about insurers, my question to you, Steve, is there a way in which insurance companies can bake into policies, sort of mandate these kinds of changes? Like, you have to adopt these kinds of systems. If you're building a new factory, you have to ensure its sustainability and across certain kinds of metrics. Otherwise, we won't underwrite your policy because we're spending hundreds of billions of dollars on this climate change problem and all of these disasters that y'all are causing with your manufacturing.
Yeah, Jon, I really do endorse that vision. So one anecdote from past but recent decades is the US auto market, and this spread worldwide, that the science to better understand what features would make cars less dangerous, less likely to explode, more safe, were driven by investments from insurance companies because they are absorbing the loss. So airbags and seatbelts and collapsible frames was all powered by science that US insurance companies funded for the good of all. The cost of operating insurance companies went down, less people died, the system was more stable. For that vision that you've just articulated, the insurance mechanism has to be applied. So I'm most familiar with the United States, and the challenge that we have is if you want to buy flood insurance in the US, you can get it really, really cheaply from the US federal government. So in a sense, we're sending people signals to go live where it's dangerous and to build without regard to their safety. What an insurance company would do is maybe not mandate it, perhaps. They might say, no, that's just too dangerous. Right on the sand at the water's edge, I can't price that at all. But if you move back 10 feet, if you elevated 5 feet, if you built out of concrete instead of plywood, I can either offer you savings or I can decide to offer the property. But the mechanism has to be out in the market for the virtuous cycle of risk-based insurance and those types of mitigation savings to be brought to play.
Yeah.
And Jon, one of the things that we're doing is we're in discussions with insurance carriers about just that. Can you give companies a discount or an advantage by using the right ingredients, by taking the right steps, ensuring it with our technology so we can actually prove it, and then address these problems and quantify these problems so they can pass that out to the insurance carriers who pass that downstream, And then I think that's how you drive change.
Right.
And I think that's really one of the engines that gets the least amount of attention, because, like you said, it's all about the consumer right now, but it has to go both ways.
Right.
It's one of the things I love about your product. Insurers and reinsurers love data, and they can deliver savings through data, but it has to be validated.
Right.
It's still too much the case in markets around the world, including the US, that data begins with human beings clicking boxes on a piece of paper.
Right.
And it flows up the chain, as you said. It's going to go from an agent to a retail broker to an insurer and up layers of reinsurance. Right. And a product like yours can tag that data all the way up, and you can allocate capital to things that are safer or even bringing about positive change.
Right. I mean, this gets into one of the issues that I think is really important across the board, which is transparency and measurement, right? And being able to accurately understand what exactly is going on across these markets, right? If we're adopting a capitalist solution to climate, which we have, debatably how effective that's going to be, fingers crossed we get things right in the next 3 years, because that's about what we have to start dropping the curve of fossil fuel demand. But you know, when you think about transparency and you think about what Aanika is doing, it's really sort of like a biological blockchain that you can attach to things and really get a sense of that sort of verification across the board. You need that in carbon markets. You need that with like how you're doing soil sequestration. You need that with how you're doing forest credits, right? Which is a terrible market right now, with a complete lack of transparency, and all the things that people thought were really safe are burning down because of climate change. So you need to find ways to monitor and measure these things appropriately, and these verification tools are critically important, I think, and have a really sort of unsung but tremendous role to play in climate solutions. They're not like sexy. It's not like new fusion reactors.
Oh, contraire.
Sorry, buddy. But I mean, like fusion is great. Like I'm a big believer in fusion as well. But you need these kinds of tools to be able to understand what's happening in markets so that you can address these problems.
Nothing is more sexy than well-allocated capital.
Said no one ever.
Stephen, I wanted to ask you, BMA has a sandbox, right? What is that? Tell us a little about that.
We're really proud about that. So across the board, this vision of establishing Bermuda as a capital for climate finance in partnership with hubs around the world like Munich is the #1 economic development strategy for Bermuda currently. It was rolled out and reinforced by our premier at last year's Earth Day throne speech and this year's, and it's rolled across agencies like the one that I run, across the private sector, and our one regulator. One advantage of Bermuda is we have robust, well-funded, outstanding regulation, and only one regulator. So if you've navigated across the EU or across the myriad US landscape, we offer you one door to knock on, and they're well-funded and really sophisticated, particularly about how climate risk resides on a balance sheet. They've been overseeing that in the climate-driven reinsurance space for 3 or 4 decades. So what you've announced, Alan, is they rolled out a couple things. They have a lot of great people. They put a lot of their good people on a climate desk so that climate-related strategies will get looked at quickly and expeditiously. It's aligned with our vision. And there's a sandbox for climate innovation. No insurer or reinsurer in Bermuda has ever defaulted on a valid claim ever, right? Wow. So literally zero. It's not low, it's not towards zero, it's literally zero. That's really important to us. So we want this to work. We want to continue to be good stewards and good participants in the market. The sandbox is a way for companies who are trying to innovate in climate to come in with an idea and deploy a little bit of capital while the regulator tests whether an idea backed by that type of technology is proven as traditional risk management philosophies. We're really, really thrilled. It's a great way to begin to enter the market in this jurisdiction, which is accepted around the world. A license for Bermuda opens up every major market around the world for you, technically, for a B2B space. So we're happy to see it, and they have a number of companies rolling through the sandbox right now.
Very cool. And Vishaal, Aanika is one of them, right?
Correct. Yeah, we looked at Bermuda, and I think it's absolutely incredible that you've got a country and a regulatory framework that can take technology that's very, non-traditional, like Aanika's, and go from that to being in front of the right partners and the regulators within, I think we did that in 120 days or something. It was
wow.
It was incredible. You just don't get that kind of support and infrastructure anywhere else. If that's, if you're going the B2B route and anything in sort of insurance and reinsurance. So it was it's an incredible thing to see, and I think that's how you drive innovation. You've got VC funds that are making investments, supporting technology, and taking a longer view. You've got regulators backing it. You've got insurance companies. This is all the behind-the-scenes stuff that needs to happen, for all these problems to get addressed.
Could regulators give more teeth to the insurance industry to sort of bake in some of these, like some structures?
Well, one straight from the headline news is it's 3 weeks old now. The U.S. National Association of Insurance Commissioners, this body that the 50 states and the several territories formed amongst themselves to try to coordinate, announced a live rule. It's live in November for companies that weren't previously doing it. U.S. insurance companies will be required to provide climate risk disclosures. The intellectual framework is the TCFD. So the U.S. SEC has proposed that. It's still in discussion, but the insurance sector has gone live with a live requirement. The BMA, pause for commercial, was already doing that. So one shot for the home team, and just recently announced a climate risk survey. So that was an aggregate survey of risk and risk management practices in the marketplace, but providing that transparency to your regulator, your investors, and your consumers is enough teeth, because people will start to vote with their feet, whether they're buying protection or investing their assets. They want to see that you're on top of your risk and that you're relatively more secure than party X. It's not important that these numbers be exact. They won't be. It's important that they be good and that they're comparative so that you can make a decision where you want to place your insurance and where you want to invest your dollars.
I think another, to your point, there are these, so one thing that we look at and we're really concerned about is what's climate change's impact on food safety. Right. So if you think of temperatures ticking up, what does that mean for more pathogen outbreaks, food contamination, water contamination? And so when like the FDA or other regulators look at trying to improve food safety, I don't think it's getting enough attention. Like, I don't think that link is being addressed enough, both by regulators or anyone else for that matter. I think it's just a very indirect thing. But to your point, I think if regulators take that view or look at the indirect effects too of what climate volatility means, I think it could just help drive more action.
Yeah.
And Vishaal, is Aanika working on anything in the future besides tagging that would maybe even mitigate risk?
Yeah, so we look at our tags as just base layer kind of infrastructure. On top of that, we can, we're working on antimicrobial peptides and other kind of technologies that could potentially sort of prevent outbreaks from the beginning, as you mentioned. And so we think that's all about risk mitigation, which flows right, again, back to the insurance carriers and the regulators.
And can insurers then bake sort of those things in, more protections based on, and I mean, what's amazing about all of this is sort of better living through biology, which is what y'all are enabling too. And I think it's important to think, like, if there are a couple of revolutions that are happening right now. One is a material science revolution, another is a biological revolution. And the programmable nature of biology now, and the things that you can do or one can do with providing sort of biological solutions to chemical problems, and replacing sort of the chemical industry that relies on cracking of fossil fuels to produce all of the things that I'm sitting on, that cube, your chairs, everything else in this room pretty much has some sort of plastic or chemical in it. And replacing that with a biological substitute is kind of amazing and unlocks an incredible amount of potential solutions to this climate problem, and you see it in food and everything else. Sorry, I'm like...
No, plus we're going to have glowing trees. We were talking about that before.
No, biology plugs are always welcome.
Well, something I'd love to add to that too is there's so much going on that's exciting, and there's so much possible that someone like myself isn't smart enough to dream of. But with Chair, it's important that we move quickly. Right. And we don't have time to arm wrestle a dozen US agencies while game-changing ideas like this, which definitionally they will struggle with brand new ideas. It's not the thing they regulated in the 80s. It's going to take them a long time. We need to get solutions like this to market in responsible ways. And but I choose to be optimistic. There's so much going on that we can bring to bear that will bend that curve. We just have to get on with it. Yeah.
100%.
Wow.
Wow. What a hopeful panel. We're not doomed. Well, we're doomed.
In less than one octave.
Yes. Well,
it only get better if Dimash was on.
Yeah, exactly.
Anybody with a last word? This has been great.
Oh, I'd like to invite you to partner with each other and with ourselves. So specifically, this is too late, but we will be together at a climate summit in Bermuda next week. So look out for social for that, and make plans to visit us next year for our vision for a Davos for Climate in Bermuda. We have a tech week in October, which I think this is a good crowd for, and we'd love to see you. But reach out. And one thing I'm sure of, we haven't thought about everything that's useful, and we'll only get that information, exchange it if we collaborate. So again, I'm thrilled to be here. You'll be pleased I did not offer to sing, but really, really happy to be part of the DLD community, and it's lovely to see you and to be part of this panel. Yeah.
Well, thank you very much.
you,
I
Ellen.
think this was really interesting.